the response of illegal mining to a tax reform in Colombia. This paper is co-authored with Mauricio Romero, a PhD student at UCSD that will be this year on the market. So this paper is a little different from the ones we have been seeing today in the sense that we are kind of users of the data we generated from the satellites. So we want to answer economic questions using this new data. And what's the motivation for the kind of questions we try to address is that there is a trend on developing countries towards decentralizing spending, but the tax revenue sources are unchanged. So they are taking the same income they had from before, but instead of using it in the local areas where they're generating the economic gains, they're just distributing it across the country. And they're seeing, what we try to answer is what's happening with tax evasion when we take this same money and we just spend it somewhere else. So that's the first question we try to address. And the second question is, okay, there is an increase in illegal activity. There might be an increase in the tax revenue we are losing, but is there any other welfare effect that we are not capturing? So those are the two questions we try to address on the paper. And of course, the main difficulty when you study illegal activity is, by definition, is illegal. How do you measure its extent? Fortunately, in the case of illegal mining, we can use satellite data to detect where illegal mines are. So what you have in this picture is an image you can obtain from your computer if you type Remedios Antioquia, which is a municipality in Colombia. And what you see here in white is the footprint of the mine. So the idea of the data we're generating is we're going to teach the computer, that's where we use the machine learning, to recognize areas that are mined. And then, once we have this data, we just check the legality of the mines, and we see if it's legal or illegal. Why is illegal mining important? You might say, okay, maybe this is a developing country paper, but it's actually important. If you look in the US, 67% of the companies, they don't know where their minerals are coming from. They might not be illegal, but you can imagine if they don't know it's coming from, it might be coming from Congo, from India. So it's a big problem that it might affect you with the cell phones you have in the pocket. And in Colombia in particular, 78% of the gold area mined is illegally mined. There are two dimensions of illegal mining that we consider is area that is mined without the title, the permit, but there is also production that is going to be evading royalties taxes. We can observe from space the first one is the area mined without title, and of course the two of them are highly correlated. And as I was mentioning, there are two dimensions of illegal mining we're interested in. The first is the tax evasion part. The second one is the environmental impacts they might have. So going back to our research question, which is how is evasion responding to the way you allocated tax revenue, we are going to exploit a law reform that happened in 2012. Before the reform, 55% of the royalties were kept locally for the mining municipality. After the reform, only 10% is allocated for the mining municipality, and the rest of the royalties are distributed across the whole country. So a simple model of bargaining that you can imagine, you are the local politician. Before the reform, I was getting most of the taxes you were paying. After the reform, I only get a little bit. So you can imagine the intuition is, okay, actually now, after the reform, I prefer to take a bribe, because if you are legal, I'm not going to get much of what you're paying. So that's a simple intuition of the model we have on the paper. And this is what we do in the paper just in one slide. So we're going to study how tax evasion responds to the share of tax revenue earmarked for the local municipality. For this, we're going to build a panel of illegal mining by municipality using satellite data and machine learning algorithms. We are going to do this for both Colombia and Peru, so we have a control country where the reform didn't happen. And so we're going to do a difference in difference strategy comparing illegal mining in both countries before and after the reform. And then to answer the second question is, okay, there might be an increase in tax evasion, an increase in illegal mining, but do we care? If they are paying the bribe and the money is staying locally, at the end, there might not be a welfare cost, right? It might just be the same money in a different pocket. And that's where we look at the health impacts. So it's this mining activity which is done in an illegal way, it might have different health effects. And for that, we're going to do an instrumental variable strategy using the timing of the reform and the river flow. So I'm going to now go slowly through these three parts of the paper. First, explain you how we construct the panel of illegal mining. then the main results on area illegally mined, and at the end, the differential health effects of legal versus illegal mines. So I guess for most people in this room, this picture is not that useful. But for me, when we start working with satellite data, we were super afraid on how do we work with that, because we are economists. And then I learned that all you do is you just have a big matrix. And now when I start thinking on matrices, that's super easy for me to understand. So what we basically do is we have a matrix with the observations of the bands of the satellites, and we have millions of rows, which are the pixels. And now we can think in regression terms. So now we are back into economic terms. And what we do is we separate 75% of the data for training. We have labels on whether there is a mine or not. We are going to train a random forest model that then we test on the 25% of the data we didn't use. And for the model we use, we have a 79% precision. So of all the pixels that we predict as mine, if we take 100, 79 are actually mined according to the testing data. And only at the end of the model, we check the legality of the mines. So you can see like little Pac-Mans, so those are the pixels. And then we overpose the legal mine areas, and whatever is outside is what we're going to call illegally mined areas. And you can imagine it's super easy for both these variables to go up through time, the area mined. And that's why our dependent variable of interest is the share of the total mined area that is illegally mined. So both variables might be going up if the prices are changing, but we're going to take this ratio between these two. And these are the main results. So in column 1, we have all the area in Colombia, and we look before and after the reform with a linear trend, and we have an increase of 1.6 percentage points. In column 2, we are going to exclude national parks. Why? Because any mining that is happening in these areas is illegal. It cannot ever be legal. So what we're going to look is, let's exclude national parks, and let's look only at those areas that could at least be legalized if they pay the taxes and the fees. And when we look only in these areas, like the effect is even stronger. And then in column 3, we do a difference in difference strategy using Peru. Because you might imagine there are changes. Even though we control for the price of the minerals extracted in column 1, there might be other changes happening. So that's why we use Peru as a control. And the effects are even stronger when we use Peru as a control. So we have an increase in illegal mining after you reduce the share of taxes that is kept locally by the municipality. We can look at the heterogeneous effects, because when we started the project, most people say, okay, illegal mining, that's all about armed groups. What we find here, looking at the heterogeneous effects, is that most of them are concentrated in areas with weak institutional presence of the national government. So these are areas where there are not many tax offices, there are not many police stations. So it's basically at the Colombian government, they don't have control over these areas. That, of course, is correlated with having armed groups, but there are simple places that they don't have a state. So you cannot like be mandating from them the taxes they're paying. And that's where we have stronger effects. We do a bunch of robustness checks that, I guess in the interest of time, I will not click on any of them, but we can look at change the mining prediction cutoff of the predictions, using instead of a 0-1 prediction, use the probability that the pixel is mined, look at border municipalities in the border of Colombia and Peru, and other bunch of robustness checks. And now we get to the second part of the paper, which is, okay, now we know that there is an increase in evasion, but does it have a welfare cost? Like, is there something happening besides losing this tax revenue? So we're going to look at health effects, because we know that in gold mining, which is a big part of the illegal mine we observe in Colombia, they use mercury for amalgamation. It goes in the river. It's consumed, like the mothers either drink the water or consume fish, and that will affect the brain of the newborns. So the idea is, because we don't have good measurements of mercury, or like in a good time series, we are going to approximate the use of mercury by the presence of the illegal mines we detected and also the legal mine areas we detected. We know where population is living within the municipalities. We know if they are upstream or downstream from a mine, and whether this mine is legal or illegal. And we have the vital statistics of the country. So we have information in every newborn baby After 10 minutes, they get the APGAR score, which is an indicator of good health. So we are going to be comparing how before and after the opening of the mine and upstream and downstream from the river, this health indicator is changing. There is a concern that there is like some correlation between having poor health indicators and having illegal mines. For example, if the mayor is corrupt, you can imagine that he's allowing a lot of illegal mines and he's not investing in the health of the babies. So we need to have like an instrumental variable. We need to look for something different that is affecting the amount of illegal mining, but it's not definitely related with the health outcomes of the municipality. And that's where we use the heterogeneous effects that we found in the previous slide. So if you have a municipality upstream from you, where there is a weak institutional presence of the national government, there's going to be a larger increase in illegal mining. Therefore, you receive more pollution, but you are not related with the revenue of that municipality. And that's the first thing we check, is whether you are more likely to be downstream from an illegal mine if upstream from you there is a municipality with weak institutional presence of the national government, and we're looking after the reform. So that's what we check in column 1. And what we do in column 2, it might just be a simple spatial correlation. It might just be that if you don't have a good institutional presence of the national government here, you also don't have it downstream. So it might just be this simple spatial correlation. So what we do is we invert the flow of the river, and we discard that that's what's explaining our results. So basically what we're saying in column 1 is we can use this instrument for the presence of illegal mining. And now we can look at the effects on APGAR, which is the health indicator I just mentioned, and being downstream from an illegal mine or downstream from a legal mine. So in the first column, we have the standard OLS results, and in the second column, we have the results using the instrumental variable strategy. And as you can see, the coefficient is 10 times larger on being downstream from an illegal mine. And what we check is whether this is statistically significant, that the coefficient on legal is larger or is less damaging than being from downstream from illegal, and the p-value is 7%. So we conclude that being downstream from an illegal mine is worse for the health effect. And what we do to conclude is, okay, we have these numbers of what you wanted to do with the tax revenue you had, and what happened when you redistribute this tax revenue. So we took the numbers from area illegally mined, and we kind of estimated what you're losing on tax revenue. And what we find is that of every dollar you wanted to send to another municipality, when you change the distributional policy, you're losing between 7 and 20 cents that are lost to evasion. So what then you need to assess is whether this money is better invested in other municipalities. And then, as I mentioned, some people say, okay, this is not a welfare cost, it's just a transfer of resources between the government and the pockets of the local government, and that's where we turn to the health effects, because this is a welfare cost. It's the same activity that you are just doing in a different way, and illegal mines might be more damaging just because they don't have the environmental license, which is one of the requirements to be legal, or just because they are illegal and they invest less in efficient machinery, or they are polluting more. And we estimate that of every dollar you wanted to redistribute, between 4 and 14 cents are lost in welfare costs in the health of babies. We only use babies because they kind of don't move around that much, so the migration history is clear. So we are not including the impacts in the rest of the population, and this is just a productivity cost. So we look at the effect of low APGAR in IQ and then in the wage when they are adults. We don't have a disutility cost of having the brain damage. So this is like an underestimate, but those are like the two main conclusions of the papers. We had these machine learning satellite tools that allow us to answer these type of questions because we were able to observe illegal activity. Thank you very much.